Shalom, this is Tree by Leaf McCurdy, Shmitalia. I am a teacher specializing in Hebrew basics for adults in a synagogue setting, and this is my presentation on a classroom inquiry I've just completed. My title is Introducing Heritage, Hebrew for Mature Beginners. By mature beginners, I'm talking about adults over the age of 30. This graphic is what I call the kaleidoscope of Hebrew. The overlapping circles represent the basic language skill set. At right, reading and speaking. At left, writing and auditory comprehension, with the wings of creative usage at the top and the roots of cultural comprehension at the bottom. With Hebrew, it's this root section that is of vast importance, because you cannot separate Hebrew and Jewishness. Hebrew literacy is a linchpin of Jewish enfranchisement. This is the whole reason why synagogues offer Hebrew classes. In fact, Hebrew literacy is actually more of an issue for Jewish identity than intermarriage. You show me a non-Jewish spouse willing to master the very basics of Hebrew, and I will show you a committed supporter of our continuity as a people. But Jews who have no Hebrew regularly speak of themselves as feeling like fraudulent, insecure, or even bad Jews. So the stakes here are huge. And we have a big problem. The introductory Hebrew course is our best shot at connecting Jews with the backbone of our heritage, and the standard approach actually overwhelms, alienates, and disengages them. The trend is to assume adult learners are showing up already energized, focused, disciplined, able to absorb tremendous amounts of data. We more or less expect them to be eager robots, and we're strip Hebrew down to a very abstract skill set that we plug into them and expect them to run. The reality is that it's precisely the richness of Hebrew that's the most important thing to transmit. And frankly, mature beginners are like woodland creatures. At this point of their lives, they're highly specialized to their own niches. They're often no longer at home in a classroom at all. They're oriented to personal survival issues. Jewish educators who teach children complain about having to compete with soccer and TV for their students' attention. I have to compete with the mortgage payment. And they are so tremendously self-conscious that one wrong move scares them off. In my position, I am used to the deer in the headlights stare. I get adults taking my class because the rabbi told them to. They don't really know why. And the answer is not in the textbook. It is in a life that is more satisfyingly Jewish. An adult learner's sense of success with my class lies entirely with their ability to engage in Hebrew outside of the class in their real lives. Brings me to my inquiry question. How can I best use this class to support my students in developing individual and enduring real-life engagement with Hebrew? I've reviewed the available literature preparing for this study. I looked for writing from the overlapping fields of adult Jewish education and Hebrew language learning, and I also looked for research on the neurology of mature learners, the different ways memory works after 30, the psychology of mature learners, the higher levels of distraction and anxiety, and of course the cultural needs where Hebrew and Jewishness build on each other. So basically I was looking for how to nurture a healthy, happy, distinctively Jewish brain. I've tried to represent these three fields, neurology, psychology, and cultural analysis, as a kind of exotic flower because there's really one core set of findings across these fields, and that is that optimal learning, that happy, healthy, distinctively Jewish brain, requires individual independence supported by a network of learning, community, and real-life personal meaning. So my question appeared to be right on track. My research design, like the plot of a good book, was significantly shaped by the constraints of my situation. Because of the high sense of vulnerability of adults starting at the very beginning, my students were not comfortable being filmed, recorded. Even my surveys needed to be rigorously anonymous. I had my surveys. I made great use of classroom discussion to find out what my students were doing at home. I'd sit up late at night as soon as I could after my class and make a journal entry of whatever I could remember of our hour together. And I was able to get some interviews with previous students in our program on what stayed with them, what they were actually able to use. Despite the fact that this was a very informal inquiry, highly qualitative in nature, my findings were exact echoes of the major themes from the scientific papers I'd studied. Individual agency, group ownership. My first finding was that mature beginners need exposure to a diverse variety of Hebrew material. This shocked me. I don't know what I was thinking after this many years of teaching adults, but the conventional idea of pedagogical best practices was so strong in me that I was really expecting to give my students every possible connection to Hebrew I could think of: prayer practice, YouTube loops, Hebrew food and art and concepts, and then see how they reacted. And I thought I'd be able to say, this is it. This is what really hooks adults into Hebrew. I was like a hostess laying out a huge buffet for my guests to find out what they wanted, and it turned out what they wanted was the huge buffet. They wanted to help hooking into Hebrew as many ways as possible to explore for themselves. They needed the Hebrew version of a music appreciation class, and they thrived on it. Second place where I realized my research technique itself was what was empowering my students was our classroom discussions. While I was finding out what was and wasn't working for my students at home, they were listening to and learning from one another. This started off as guided discussion with me asking the questions, but by the end of our class, they were adept at this kind of analysis and resource sharing and individual adaptation all on their own. It became spontaneous and constant. The visual I chose to represent this is like a participatory art analysis class in a museum, only instead of studying a picture, this class is studying themselves, and of course, the instructor is in the reflection. And finally, this was the year I really saw my students make the transition from class to community, each building themselves a world of Hebrew-rich relationships and investment. Meeting as a class, sending out emailed lesson summary and resource links, encouraging them to pump their Hebrew friends for help, drawing their attention to Hebrew in all the Jewish events of their lives. All of these work together to provide multiple points of connection to support that essential transition from seeing themselves as just taking a Hebrew class to seeing themselves as Hebrew participants connected by Hebrew community. Recommendations for other synagogues: recognize the unique degree of diversity, anxiety, and learning challenges of mature beginners. Recognize that introductory Hebrew must lay a strong foundation rather than building up a quick structure. Introduce Hebrew to mature beginners by combining the what of basic language skills and the why of Jewish context with the how and when and where of engaging with Hebrew in real life. Provide a varied buffet of material to build Hebrew appreciation. Guide classroom reflections on home practice to build self-confidence and improve study techniques, and support the creation of personal Hebrew community in multiple ways. In conclusion, this inquiry really inspired a paradigm shift for me regarding my own role, the role of an introductory Hebrew teacher for adults. I realized my responsibilities are really those of a shadchan. I want my students to have a fruitful, lifelong relationship with Hebrew. I'm responsible for more than simply setting them up with Hebrew. I make sure they have reasonable expectations of this relationship, both of their own contributions and what they can expect to receive. I do all I can to introduce them to Hebrew in a way that is pleasant and meaningful and hope-filled. I tend to their natural nervousness. I speak to their misgivings and their sense of their own shortcomings. I urge them to reach out. In short, it is my sacred trust to arrange circumstances to maximize their chances of falling in love with our heritage language and of sustaining that loving relationship over the rest of their lives as Jews. On that note, I will close. If anyone would like to read the 50-page paper behind this presentation, email me if you know me, or message me on Facebook, Tree by Leaf McCurdy. I am the only one. Shalom.